The Morrison government ignored independent recommendations in allocating funding from a $100 million sports program, prioritising marginal coalition seats over merit. For more, I'm joined by Political Editor Andrew Clennell. Andrew, the Auditor-General says then Sports Minister Bridget McKenzie ran a parallel process to Sport Australia. It sounds pretty damning.
It's very damning. It's a scathing Audit Office report on the Minister and her administration of these $100 million grants, Tom. And it's already been compared to the Ros Kelly whiteboard affair from the early 1990s. Now, this saga began in August 2018 when the government announced a $29 million fund for sports grants, local sports grants. The following month, September 2018, 1 month after Scott Morrison becomes PM, Sport Australia was asked by Ms McKenzie's office not just for their list of recommended grants, but a list of all 2,054 applications that had been rendered eligible. This is what the Audit Office found. They found that eventually, for the first round of funding, a briefing that recommended 426 grants the Sport Australia board had endorsed was prepared, but at no stage submitted to the Minister. Instead, the Minister's office informed Sport Australia of the applications that were going to be approved by the Minister. And the report talks about a parallel process of assessment, as you alluded to, by the Minister's office to the department. So let's have a look at point 18 of the report, if we can. It found the Minister's 11th December 2018 funding decisions were based on the results of a parallel assessment process conducted by the Minister's office. This process drew upon coalition marginal electorates and targeted electorates. And we know this, Tom, because the report also says that the Auditor-General took sworn testimony from 2 members of Bridget McKenzie's staff. Now, the reason this came to light, the reason there was an investigation, is during the election campaign, Georgina Downer, who was running against Rebecca Sharkey in the seat of Mayo, announced a $127,000 grant to the Yankalilla Bowling Club. And the opposition realised this was a bit unusual because Georgina Downer was a candidate. She wasn't an MP. What the report finds is that 2 of 3 applications for Mayo were successful. Now, let's have another look at an important point in this report. Point 8, it finds there are no records evidencing that the Minister was advised of the legal basis on which the Minister could undertake an approval role, and it is not evident what that legal authority was. Now, the report found that in the first round of funding, which was expanded, incidentally, during the election campaign from $29 million to $100 million, but the first round of funding, 41% of projects were not endorsed by the Sports Australia board, 70% of projects in the second round weren't endorsed by that board, and 73% in the third round, which landed in April 2019, were not endorsed by close to the election, were not endorsed by that Sports Australia board. Now, I've been to the Prime Minister's office this morning to ask if the Prime Minister or his office were aware of the way these grants were administered. I'm yet to receive a response on that or a comment from the Prime Minister. No doubt he'll be asked today, and no doubt he'll be defending his minister. As for Bridget McKenzie, well, she was in a bolshy mood on radio this morning as she defended herself. Let's have a listen to that.
There was a significant increased number of applications from areas that are represented by the coalition, and obviously that will be reflected in decisions. But the reality was there were many hundreds of meritorious projects that we just didn't have the funding available for. No rules were broken. All projects that were assessed as eligible for funding received it. There was absolute focus by Sport Australia now on addressing the issues highlighted by the ANEA report.
Now, the Minister's right, Tom, in saying that only eligible grants got the nod, because the Minister's office only asked for that entire list of grants which have met the eligibility criteria. But they clearly went against what their bureaucrats on merit were recommending. As you can expect, the opposition's jumping up and down on this. Let's hear from Tony Burke on it.
We don't want to wait for Parliament before there's action taken here. I don't see how Bridget McKenzie remains a minister. I don't see how she does. And Scott Morrison needs to draw the line on everything being his personal marketing strategy and getting back to a level of due process and making it clear to his ministers and to the bureaucracy that that's what he would expect.
Now, of course, we've seen a few examples of this on both sides of politics. Senior coalition figures this morning are pointing me to some grants administered by the Labor frontbencher Catherine King at the end of the Rudd-Gillard governments, where there was part of $1 billion worth of regional development fund grants, of which the Audit Office found that 48% weren't recommended by the panel, and they targeted marginal seats as well. But I have to say, Tom, two wrongs don't make a right.
That's absolutely true. Look, I think it's fair enough to look at previous examples, because when one party is saying, this is outrageous, how could you ever do that? And you go back to the last time they were in office. It's a while ago now, Andrew Clennell, but that's just because they've lost elections. It's fair enough to point that out. I found it very interesting, the evidence, though, within this report. A lot of the times, you know, there's analysis of things and you say, well, look at the percentage here that happened to help out the coalition, whether it be marginal seats that they were targeting or trying to hold on to. This time, as you were alluding to there, we're talking about evidence from those in the office saying that this was a strategy. There's no coincidence. There's no, well, that's how it all laid out. This was a strategy to do that.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff, isn't it? Just the terms, targeted and coalition marginal seats. This is taxpayers' money. This isn't Liberal Party money, and it's simply not acceptable. I mean, I think Scott Morrison on this would be glad we don't have Parliament for another couple of weeks. And I think the coalition would also be glad that Bridget McKenzie's in the Senate. It might be one of the more eagerly awaited Senate question times for a change. But no doubt Morrison will come under heat himself, because how these things work, it's been put to me, is generally the PMO is kept in the loop. Maybe they're even involved. And again, you know, I'm happy to be corrected on that, but no one's saying from the Prime Minister's office, yep, we didn't know about this, we didn't know how it was done. I expect Scott Morrison just to get on the offensive, saying they were all eligible grants, which they were, and we don't have to take the bureaucrats' advice on everything. He'll be, attack is the best form of defence, and he'll be into it today.
And yet you've got the other question, legality, which is pretty incredible. I mean, in two ways, if a minister was getting this advice and not worrying about it, and even, you know, what do we expect out of our bureaucrats, Andrew Clennell? This was just before an election. If they thought this wasn't legal, why didn't we hear something out of them?
Well, probably because they're worried about losing their jobs. But the Auditor-General, I have to say, yeah, it's almost angry, you know, as angry as an Auditor-General can be, Tom, in terms of some of the language there. He's really hung Bridget McKenzie out to dry. Well, I'm sure they're watching, the relevant people you've been reaching out to get an answer to your other questions, Andrew Clennell, so I dare say we'll see you again through the morning. Thank you. Thanks, Tom.